Hello everyone, Patricia Worby, Alchemy Therapies here. And I just want to, in this third video in my series on dementia, talk to you a little bit about this book, Contented Dementia by Oliver James, and the speckle method. I don't know if that's how you say it, or special, perhaps some people call it. It's sort of supported early care for Alzheimer's, I think is what it stands for. Which is a controversial new approach. It hasn't been supported by the Alzheimer's Society in the UK for the reason that it actually encourages carers of people with dementia to, some say, collude in the delusions of dementia. So, as you may or may not know, in dementia, people often misremember things. They don't have short-term memory so well, and they lose that function. And so they will often draw on past experiences to make sense of their present. And this is sometimes judged by observers, people who are around them, as a delusion. I'll give you an example from my own life. So when my mother lost the remote control to her TV, in a non-demented person, that would be understood. I've lost the remote control. I need to look for it. I'll find it. It's probably around here somewhere. With dementia, you are aware that something is wrong. You feel it because the normal props of your life, which may involve something to do with television, because it becomes quite important for people to have some sort of interaction. They stop going out often, so TV can be one of the lifelines, as can a phone in the early stages. So you're aware something that should be there isn't there, but your memory will not tell you what it is that's missing. So you have the awareness that something's wrong, which is what we call the amber state of being. So you're distressed, you're upset, you know something that should be in place isn't. And then your brain tries to make sense of what it is that's wrong. And here's where short-term memory fails you. And so you have to draw on the past as an understanding. And in my mum's case, it was that somebody had come in and taken the remote. And this is what she rang me to tell me. Some man had come in and taken the remote control and told her it was the wrong one for the TV. Now, in my former state of just thinking, oh, here we go, this is a delusion, I would have become extremely anxious about that. And probably my voice tone would have communicated to my mum that that was very untrue. I would have probably said something in that way. I would have said, oh, no, of course it's not. Causing further stress, distress, in fact, to my mum, who believes this is what's happened. Now, what this method, this contented dementia method, encourages is for you not to disagree with the client, but to sort of steer the conversation along familiar lines that help them to come down from amber to what I call the green zone, which is a state of social engagement. Because if you can imagine, they're very distressed. They're reaching out to you for a purpose. They want to be soothed, but they don't know how to soothe themselves anymore because the memory that should be there that would tell them what is happening has gone. So it's almost a permanent distress state. So this approach then says, well, I will say to this person, okay, all right, well, let's see what it's a definitely engaging with them as a team approach, what we can do about that. And it's not about shooting them down and disagreeing with what they're saying. Now, this is the controversial bit, and it's the bit that the Alzheimer's Society say is counterproductive to the dignity of the person with dementia. So in other words, we should always tell them the truth. And I can see both points of view, but I can tell you that working with my own mum, and it's just one person, I haven't worked with anyone else, but it does seem to work better not to disagree with her in the first instance, but to steer the conversation latterly and say, well, maybe it's gone for a reason and I'm sure we can get it back, okay? Now that is semi-true. It has gone for a reason because it's actually been lost, and as it turned out, it was lost down the side of the sofa. So in a normal situation, as I said, you would just tell the person, have you checked the side of the sofa? And they would go and check it. But because my mum's so fixated on the idea that it's been taken, that isn't going to satisfy her. So what you've got to provide then is an explanation that colludes in some way with her vision of what's happened, but steers it towards the solution, which is that someone else will come and sort it out for her, which is what we did, and it all ended very happily. What can tend to happen for the person who's caring for someone with dementia is our own anxiety levels are triggered, because what they're saying doesn't make sense, and it makes us feel very out of control for them and of our own ability to help them. Particularly with the stigma around mental health in Western culture, we have a lot of shame around the fact that this person is apparently saying things that are mad or bad or weird. And so our whole body language, if we're talking to them one-on-one, will indicate that. And remember, people with dementia still pick up feelings and sensations. Emotional input is not disabled. It's just the content, the facts that disappear. So if you look stressed and anxious, if you sound angry or in a rush, that's what they will pick up, and regardless of the words that you use. So if you said to them, "It'll be all right," you don't sound soothing, and they won't remember that it will be all right. They'll remember that something is wrong, and that there's something else they need to do. And this will keep them in the amber zone. In fact, it sometimes sends them into a state of very high distress, which is what tends to happen. And they can sometimes go into an overwhelmed freeze state, which is how you see a lot of old people in care homes, unfortunately, where they're just zoned out, dissociative, numb. Their nervous systems have gone into this third state of the red zone. And so it shares a lot of characteristics actually with trauma. And if you look at dementia as a form of perpetual trauma, then dealing with it is about bringing the nervous system state down from amber into green, into social engagement, so that they connect with you again. And if they feel valued, and if they feel like they have something to contribute, they have a skill that somebody else needs. And this is one that I've been tying into my mum, because she's very good at advising. When I told her yesterday about something that's happened to a friend of mine who's just lost her mum, my mum was full of caring for this, and she advised me what to do. And of course, it isn't something that I will follow up because it wasn't actually appropriate, but it was very thoughtful and caring of my mum to lean in and want to help. So you see, she felt good after that conversation because she's still an adult, she's not a child. And what a lot of care situations do is they disempower people by actively scaring them, by creating more distress when people disagree or they look anxious or upset by what the person has said. And so you have this escalation of distress, which can result, as I've said, in usually a somnambulistic state or a freeze state, which is usually medicated then. And so we have the whole system, the medical system, of dealing with dementia as mental illness. Now, I'm not going to go into that in detail in this video, but just to say that if you understand it as a disability, perhaps you would be a little bit more able to deal with it functionally without being so fearful of the outcome. It is the medical model itself and this idea of risk assessment. When somebody is first considered to be suffering from dementia, what do? We assess them straight away. We do the first thing is we sit them down in an unfamiliar environment with someone they don't know, and we ask them lots and lots of questions, which, if they are suffering from dementia, they're going to struggle to answer. And that is just a terrible way of dealing with things. When we're looking at people who are, for instance, in great distress, they're suicidal or they're self-harming, we do similar things. We send them apart, we section them, we take them to hospital, we subject them to a barrage of tests, and what they really need is soothing. So if we can find a way to soothe the person and make them feel valued and connected, the social engagement system comes online. They're able to meet our gaze. They're able to detect that we're not anxious ourselves, because this is really, really important that we're not anxious when we engage with people who are liable to go into anxiety really easily. So in many ways, dementia shares many aspects of trauma and suicidality, self-harming, dissociative states. And we need to understand it on that basis. And rather than pathologize it and say it's part of, the mental health, I guess, illness spectrum, we can actually look at it as a progressive loss of certain types of functioning. So that's why I think it's helpful to look at it as a disability. And if we can engage the parts that are still working, meaning some sort of purpose, some sort of knowledge of who they were before the dementia struck, and give them motivation to be engaged in what they can manage, then we take away a lot of the distress associated with dementia, both for them and, more importantly, for us too, because as carers, we take a big lot of responsibility on, and it's very, very hard working with people in that state when you are emotionally linked to them. It's not the same if you're just caring as a job, but if they're part of your family or you're emotionally linked to them, then this is where our own mental health can actually suffer. So I think reducing the stress on both the sufferer and the person who's caring for them is so vital. And that's why I'm finding this approach really, really interesting. Moving on to how to engage them in vital tasks like toileting, looking after themselves and eating. One of the things that I found really works is the we approach. So isn't it time we had a cup of tea? Or isn't it time we had breakfast? Oh, I know, why don't we? Or I wonder if are much better ways of approaching something that needs to be done than saying, do you want a cup of tea? Do you think you should have breakfast now? And again, this is controversial because obviously we want them to be empowered to make decisions on their own behalf. And certainly in the early stages, you can still ask direct questions like that. And my mum certainly will respond if I ask her, does she want a cup of tea? And she'll say, oh, yes, lovely. So she's not too far gone. But when people do get to later stages, questions like that are loaded because, as I mentioned, I think in the first video in the series, they require you to pull out of short-term memory, whether you've had one, whether it's appropriate, whether it's the right time of day. All of these things need to be assessed before you answer that question, and they're all unavailable. You've got all these blanks in your memory base. So working on the we frame and giving them corroboration of their decisions and how clever, oh yes, that's a really good idea, when they come up with suggestions for something to do, even if it doesn't quite fit with your plans and you have to change it later. Giving them validation is also another really important part of dealing with this condition. So I hope that's given you food for thought. In my final video on the subject, I'm going to be talking about preparation for moving somebody from their home environment into a care setting, because that's another thing we do extremely badly in the current model. And obviously this isn't something I can talk about practically because I haven't done this yet, but I'll be outlining the theory of how to prepare someone for that. So looking forward to speaking to you then. Do subscribe, do make comments, and contact me at alchemytherapies.co.uk. Thanks for listening.